This is Gemara Menachos, Daf Nun Zayin. And we're holding on Nun Zayin Amud Aleph. We are 4 lines from the top. As we quote Gufas, we're going to dive a bit deeper into the aforementioned ruling din of Rav Yochanan. Says the Gemara Gufa. Amar Rabba bar Chanam Rav Yochanan, Iniach Bazar al Gabi Gachalim. You leave meat on top of a kol. This is a Shabbos din. Havach ba chayiv, you flip it over your chayiv. Lo havach ba, you don't flip it over. Potter, you're potter. Says the Gemara, what is the precise case? Echidami. Elaim, if you're going to tell me the case was the loy havach be loy bishol. If you didn't flip it over, it wouldn't cook. And the only way it cooked is why? Because you flipped it over. Says the Gemara. Then pshita, then of course, you cooked it. So what's the shayla? Ella, you know what the chiddush is? That even if you did not flip it over, eventually nami avei bashal would have cooked. So then the kasha is, amai loy mechayev. So and even if he didn't flip it over, why is he not chayev? He cooked the meat on Shabbos. Says the Gemara Leitzricha. The case is a complicated Shabbos nuanced din. If you didn't flip it over, it would have cooked on one side to Mechel ben Josai, which is the lowest level of edibility. Rashi over here weighs in a massive achlekes rishayim. Rashi here calls it shlishu bim vushal, 1/3 cook. And then what happened was when he went and he flipped it over, you know what he caused? He caused bashal mitznei stading k'mechel ben jesai. Mishnei stadim, it cooked on both sides to the requisite amount of edibility. The kamash malan. So what's the chiddush that we're learning? The chol mitzad echad k'mechel ben jesai loy klumhu. A unique chiddush that cooking a piece of meat from one side to edibility is nothing. And that's the reason, if you look at Rashi in the first narrow line, Rashi articulates that which we learned. If you did not turn it over your potter, even though it cooks from one side, that's the chiddush. The chiddush is one side in Mechel ben Jesai does not do anything for us. Continues the Gemara, Amar Rava, bavim nitzla ba, but if in one place it's fully cooked, it's Sliya Gemura, it's fully cooked, then chayiv, you're gonna be chayiv. Says the Gemara, what is Rava's din? Amar le Ravina le Ravashi. Ravina says to Ravashi, b'makom echad in bishnayim oy bebeis mekaymais loy. It sounds like Rava's din is precisely if it cooks only in one place, but if it cooked in 2 or 3 places, not. What's the kasha of Atanana Gemara and Shabbos? Ha-koidea kol shu chayiv. You drill any amount, you're chayiv, meaning any little bit of amilacha is its own chiyuv. So says the Gemara, why would it not be the same thing? That each bit of cooking should be the same thing. So says the Gemara, slow down. Hey, chidami. If you're going to tell me, no, excuse me, it's part of the kasha. You drill a little bit, your chai. Says the Gemara, let's understand what that means. If you're going to tell me that you drilled in one teeny little bit, what's that fit for? You know what the case is? The case is you drilled in 2 or 3 places, and therefore what? The chazi letziraf. It's chazi. This is the way that you build, as Rashi articulates. And therefore, says the Gemara, what do we see? That each and every little bit is chayiv. So why by us should not be the same thing? That even if it's 2 or 3 places, you should be chayiv. Says the Gemara, loy. Lo'olam, I'll tell you. B'makam echad chazi lebava taklida. It's suitable for the tooth of a key is opened. That is the case over there. Lashain shel mafteach. Rashi says that one side is narrow, one side is a little bit larger, and that's the case of a kedeach kolshu. They are going to be chayiv, and therefore it's no kasha to our case. Again, over there we thought that even though each little maisa was insignificant, But when you put three little insignificant mices together, all of a sudden now you get a longer hole. All of a sudden now you're going to have a matziv of drilling, of building of Shabbos. So we thought that the same thing should be by us, that each little bit of cooking should combine to one's grois amount. And why then do we say it has to be all in one location? Responds the Gemara, no. Over there by HaKodeach, it is in one area, just like by us. The cooking has to be fully in one area. Igedi Amri, another Lashain. Amai Rava, I said Rava, if you cook a gregarious amount in 2 or 3 places, all the few areas will combine to create a chiyuv. Amrli Ravina Ravashi, Avananami Tanino, we also learned in a brisa, HaKodeach kol shu chayiv, you drill a little bit, your chayiv echidam, you leave makom echad. If you're going to tell me that it's in one place, kol shulamai chazi, what's cooking this one teeny little bit and one little place going to do for us? Allah v'shtayim we give him l'kam is the chazi l'tzir. So the Gemara lai l'makam echad the chazi l'bavadak lida. A second lashon. Continues the Gemara back to our original discussion. What's our original discussion? Of course, we're in Menachos, is the carbon mincha. And the din of our Mishnah that we're upon discussing is that once the carbon mincha becomes chametz, once it becomes leavened, each part of the process is a separate isser. Tanu Rabbanan says the Gemara 20 lines to the bottom. First one line is Asher Takrivu. Asher Takrivu LaHashem lo yisei aseh chametz. You offer to Hashem, it should not be made chametz. I would have thought Eli Ela b'loisasei chametz. I would have thought that including the isser of loisaseh chametz is what elakaimetz bilvat is only the Kamitza. I would have thought that the Isser is for the Kohen to take the Kamitza and cause it to Chametz. But Mincha Minayim, where do we know that the rest of the carbon Mincha is not allowed to become Chametz, the Shirayim, even after or before the Kamitza is removed? Tamalaymar mincha, continues the brisa. Shar minachas minayim. Where do we know other minachas? Tamalaymar kol ha-mincha. Continues the brisa. Asher takriv l'Hashem, that you bring to Hashem. Kshera v'lei psula. A kosher mincha, not a apostle one. Mikan amru, from here we see ha-machmitz es ha-kshera chayiv. If you cause a mincha to become chametz, you are chayiv. Vesapsula, if you cause a pasul mincha to become chametz, then pater. Of course, pater means it wasn't the right thing that you're done, but you're not going to be chayiv. That the iser of causing the carbon mincha to become chametz is only on a kosher carbon. Now, says the Gemara, on this shaila is really going to bring us back to our discussion back from the Nvavam Abis, which is that we learned at the end of the Mishnah that every part of the process of the carbon mincha that is done with chametz is a separate isser deraisa. However, the question was, not the question, the chiddush was that even though it's a pasul carbon, it contains that isser deraisa. So on that nikuda, because of course once it becomes chametz, it's pasul. So to say that once it becomes chametz, working with it is a separate isser deraisa, that's a chiddush. So on that, b'yira papa chimsa v'yatzasa v'chazer v'chimsa ma'u. If one caused him to become chametz, and then you had a psul yatza, and then what? It left the Beis HaMikdash. Says the Gemara, v'chazar v'chimsa, and then he made it kol chametz again. Ma'u, what is the halacha? Do we say that because there's a psul yitzia on this item, it cannot have a subsequent psul chametz, or maybe not? Says the Gemara explains, says Rabba, even the Yatzav Salah, once it leaves the Beis HaMikdash is possible. Be Yotzev, Chadar Machmetz La, then when you made a Chametz, La Mechayev Allah, Misha Machmetz, Acher Machmetz, Oitel more perhaps, given the Chimsa apostle, once it was Chametz, already was possible. So Yotzev Le Mahani Bey, So who cares that there was a psul yitziyah? There was already a psul yitziyah, already was a psul chametz, and therefore v'chiader machmitzla, and therefore when subsequently you made a kam chametz again, you're going to yes be machayev la misham machmitz achar matzmitz. So meaning, do we view this to be a simple case like our Mishnah, like we learned in the Brayso on Vavam Beis, that chametz after chametz indeed contains an isser? Or do we say the fact that there was a psul yitziyah in the middle makes it not? Says the Gemara, it's a gavaldik kasha teiku. We have to wait for Eliyahu Navi for this one. By Ram Mari, a similar shayla. Chimsa b'reisha mezbeach mau. If he caused the kaimetz of the mincha to come chametz on the top of the mizbeach before you burnt it, mau asher takrivu amrach manav ha'ikriva. Do we say that any mincha that you bring could not be chametz, and therefore, once you brought it on the mizbeach, it was already makriv. So to become chametz right now, is that also? Oh, tell him aktara. Very good to burn on top of the mizbeach. You didn't burn it yet, and therefore come chaser ma'aseh dami. Teiku nachamo. We have to wait for Eliyahu Hanavi. Continues the Gemara. The previous Brayso, about 15 lines up, taught us that what? From the pasuk of Kol HaMincha, we learn that causing something to become chametz, that there's an isser causing to become chametz on the entire mincha. So Asher Takrivu Hashem Lamli, so Asher Takrivu Hashem, says the Gemara, Mibayilei, 2 lines to the bottom, Lechdetanya, for the following Brayso. Asher Takrivu L'Rabbis, Minchas Nesachim L'Chimotz, the Rav Yossi HaGlili, even the Minchas Nesachim. Rav Akiva Omer, no, the Rabbis Lachem Aponim L'Chimotz. Minchas Nesachim, though, says the Gemara, what did Rav Yossi HaGlili say? Rav Yossi HaGlili said, it's the rabbis, the Minchas Nisachim. Says Gemara, whoa, slow down. The Minchas Nisachim is made peiros. Hey, it's made from made peiros, oil, and therefore what? As we turn over to Nun, Zayin, Amid, Beis, a very pashit, famous, and important rule. Made peiros ein machmitzin. Made peiros does not cause chametz. So says the Gemara, I don't understand what's going on over here. You just told me that Rav Yossi comes to be marbeh meiperos, the Minchas Nesachim, but the Minchas Nesachim is an entity that is made from meiperos, and if that is true, there should be no chametz bechlal. Amar Reish Lakish, says Reish Lakish, and we lost our highlighter. Where did he go? Here it is. Omer Hayer Rav Yossi HaGlili. Minchas Nesachim Mikavla B'mayim Ukesheira. This is the din of Rav Yossi HaGlili that what? If you need your Minchas Nesachim with water, it will still be kosher. So now we have a dough that was eaten with water and with meiperos with shemen, so that avada could become chametz. In this case is what we need the extra limud hakra for. Says the Gemara, now let's go to the next shita. What was the next shita in the Brayso? It was Rabbi Akiva. What did Rabbi Akiva say? Comes to be marbeh. Asher Takrivu comes to say that lechem aponim can't be chametz. Says the Gemara, lechem aponim midas yaveshi. I don't understand. The lechem aponim is a measurement designed for salads. We know that Rabbi Akiva holds Amar midas yavesh. The measurements for the salads does not have kedusha, and therefore the lechem ha'aponim themselves do not have kedusha until when? Until it is placed on the shulchan, not during the preparation process. And therefore, how can you tell me that there's an isser? How can you tell me that there's an isser to cause it to become chametz? There's no kedusha right now. Says the Gemara, Shalach Rabbi Reuven Mishmei Rabbi Yochanan Kach Yotza Shala Mishnah. Let me explain to you what the Mishnah, what the Brayso meant. The Eibach, and you have to switch it around as follows: 6 lines from the top, Nun Zayin Mabis. Asher Takrivu, the Rabbis Lachem Aponim L'Chimotz Tivi Rabbi Yossi HaGlili. Rabbi Kiva Omer, the Rabbis Minchas Nesachim L'Chimotz. So now we switch around the sheetas. Now what does that help us? Ve'ozda So that helps us because now Rabbi Akiva, because according to Rabbi Akiva, he was the shita that said the Mechas Esachim could be made with water, and therefore it makes sense that there's going to be a din of chimutz. However, not by the lechem hapanim. Why? Because there is no kedusha. However, Rav Yosef Glili holds, which we haven't seen yet, we're going to see soon. He's going to hold the even sheikh to the lechem hapanim. Why? Because he's going to hold on Tafsadi that even the midah for Yavesh is yes niskacha, and therefore it will have kedusha even before being brought in the shulchan. Therefore, it makes sense that there will be a potential isser of chimutz. Says the Gemara. This explanation of Rav Yochanan is as Rav Yochanan Taimei. Rav Yochanan say Glili v'Echon Talmidav. Rav Yishmael Amru Davarecha Numani. Who is this Talmud? Rabbi Yeshaya Titanya Vayim Shachem Ve'Kadesh Isam. Says the pasuk that he anoints them and he makes them kaddish. Rabbi Yeshaya Omer Mitzalach Nimshach B'Bifnei B'Machotz. But midas yavesh nimshach b'Bifnei Nimshach B'Machotz. And Rabbi Yochanan Omer, and here it is. Midas halach nimshach b'Bifnei Nimshach B'Machotz. But midas hayavesh loy nimshach kol ikar. So now it makes a lot of sense that Rabbi Yochanan is giving this teretz. It says, Rabbi Yochanan, I'll bring you a raya. Teidalacha, I'll bring you a raya. Why? Sharein mekadshoy. I'll bring you a raya. Sharein mekadshoy. Zechsev. Mi moishoy zeichav taviu lechem tenufa shrayim shnei Yisroim nimselas tienacham meitz teyafena bikurim Lashem. Says the Torah, from your moishoy zeichem, from your dwelling places, bring the lechem for waving. 2 loaves of tu Yisrael, fine flour, baked, and then they are brought to Hashem as bikurim. Emasai hein laHashem lachshenef, only after they're baked. So says the Gemara. So what is this machlekes? From the fact that we see that it's after they baked. This is where Rabbi Yochanan says that the midah, the vessels, loy niskadsha, and the kedusha is only coming afterwards. The shas afiyah. So says the Gemara, what is this machlekes? And again, this really is going to center on a machlekes that we're going to get to eventually on Tafsadi, figuring out exactly when the lechem hapanim is this kaddish. It says the Gemara, you know what the machlekes of Yishai and Rabbi Yochanan is? The machlekes is be'oisam. The machlekes is the word oisam in the pasuk, and Moshe vayimshachem oisam. Rabbi Yishai savar oisam lemute midas yavish b'achot, v'yinosan savar midas yavish cholhu. Midas yavish is a din of chol, there's no kedusha bechlal, and therefore lo yitzchak kar lemute. So what is the kasek come to be mamayik? Yitzchak kar lemute midas lach mibachotz. So says the Gemara, B'lei manami, Rabbi Akiva echad mitamid Rabbi Yishmael, Amru davar echad manu Rabbi Yonasan. Why are we saying, we just have Yosef Rabbi Yeshaya agree in a case of Midas ha-lach, because that was Rabbi Yochanan. Says the Gemara, but really, Lema, Rabbi Yochanan could have said, he only said Rabbi Yeshaya and Rabbi Yosef Glili. Why doesn't he also say Rabbi Akiva echad tamid Rabbi Yishmael, Amru davar echad, and who is that? Rabbi Yonasan. Says the Gemara, you know why? Misham dol shavu b'midas halach. They don't agree with midas halach, so he wanted to quote a shita that at least agrees with midas halach and only argues by midas ha yavish. Omar le Rav Papa Abaye, says Rav Papa Abaye. Let's go back. V'hoikam bisa, but there is the bisa de lacho. As Rashi teaches us, what's the bisa? Bisa is a klisharis. And frekt Rav Papa Abaye, I don't understand. This is the bowl that you mix the oil and the flour of a carbon mincha. And that is a des of a kli that is used for lach. And therefore what? Everyone agrees it as kedusha. And l'chayra frekt Rav Papa Abaye, when you mix the lechem hapanim as well, it was done in this bowl. So why at this stage should it not receive the kedusha? Amar le, Abaye responds, ki goyin shalosh al gabe katavlo. Says Abaye, the case is where you need it on top of a leather spread, meaning you didn't do it inside this bowl. Frakti Gemara Yachid Kamerli Rabbi Yonasan Tedel Chashena Mikadeshes Lema like you going to Kaile Bisar in the Chol. Why does he have to bring that raya? Why doesn't he just say that they measured it in such a container that did not have kedusha? Says Gemara, no, Hachiashta. Bishlam, I understand the Bisalai. I understand that the case of the Bisa, because Rachmana Delavid Bisa Limalish Bay. The Torah never taught us that you have to knead it inside this Bisa bowl. Therefore, you can eat it wherever you want, and it's not a problem. Elisarain, what was your case? Your case was by the Yisarain. Once the Torah taught us to make it Yisarain and measure it, the flour, Shavik Yisarain the Kaidesh. Is there a way that you could do it not in the Yisarain the Kaidesh, a Kail be Yisarain the Chol? Therefore, that's a much bigger Chedesh, and for Rav Yishai cannot have said that it's a simple case he didn't do it inside the Kli that was Kadosh. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, one last halacha, Minayin, 15 lines to the bottom. First line is Minayin Lamaila, Mi Basar Chatas, Mi Basar Asham, O Mi Basar Kache Kadashim, O Mi Basar Kache Kalim, O Mi Meiser Aimer, Mi Meiser Shtei Alechem, O Mi Lechem Aponim, Shir Minchos, Shehu Beloisasei. Says the Brisa, where do we know that if you bring the meat of a Chatas, the meat of a Nash, the meat of Kache Kalim, the remainder of the Aimer, the Shtei Alechem, Lechem Aponim, how do you know that in all these cases that there is a Isser De'araisa? Talmud Loimar says the pasuk, Ki chol sa'ar v'chol davash lo yisak tir mimenu isheh la'Hashem. And from here we learn out, Kol shu mimenu li'ishim. We learn from this pasuk any part of the carbon which is already put on the mizbeach, harehu bebal taktiru. You're not allowed, part of the Isra, you should not burn. And from here we learn out that for the pasuk that once a carbon is on the mizbeach, the remainder is not allowed to be brought up. Meaning, you bring up one part on the mizbeach, the other part of the carbon is not there. You're not allowed to put the other part of that carbon onto the mizbeach. Says the Gemara, 1 second. The fact that you're talking about basar karbanos, I get, but shtei alechem aponim yesh mehen liishim. I don't understand. The shtei alechem aponim. Is there a din that it goes in the fire of the mizbeach? That you're going to tell me that the shirayim could also be included in the sense of the raisa? V'atani, we learned in the raisa shtei alechem aponim shein mehem liishim. They don't go on the fire. Amar Rav Sheshes, and yes, mikufa. There is nothing from the bread itself that is on the fire, and that is why it is excluded. But you're right, it's a different form of carbon. It's true that there's no din that is brought on the mizbeach. However, the concept of shirayim still does apply, because the shtei Rashi, because the shtei kavasim matter up the shtei alechem, and therefore the shtei alechem and the lechem aponim alein, they themselves have a din of a quote-unquote shirayim. Therefore, they cannot be brought in the mizbeach, and if they are, then that would be the same issur d'oraisa. We'll stop over here. We'll pick it up from Itmar the next year. B'siyata dishmaya.